So I think, are we ready to get started? Okay. So I would encourage anyone to come up a bit if you want to be close to the front. There's plenty of seats up here. There's also much room on the side, and you can see really well from the side as well. So later, our panelists will be sitting on these chairs that are a bit low to the ground. So I would encourage you to definitely be close to the front so you can see them. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for telling me. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay, right? Yes. Okay, great. So we're going to get started. So welcome, everyone, for joining tonight. I'm really glad that you're all here. So today is a special day. It's not just Valentine's Day. It's also I Love Free Software Day. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, I'll introduce myself. I will be the MC for tonight. My name's Sarah. I work at Zalando as our diversity officer. But I have a history with using open source software as well. So my favorite software is QGIS, which is a GIS mapping software. And I've been working in mapping and data visualization for many years before I joined Zalando. So I'm really happy to be here. Our lovely organizer, Hong, invited me to be the MC tonight. So I'm really excited to introduce some amazing speakers. And we also have a wonderful panel, too. So first, a little bit about free software and I Love Free Software Day. So this comes from the Free Software Foundation, which is a nonprofit with a worldwide mission to promote user freedom. So they defend the rights of software users. So it's not just free, it's also about freedom. So this is a special day, and we're here to celebrate free software, how important it is to our lives, to our ability to build technical software, technical solutions, and just to make everything we do more rich. So we've got a lot of speakers here. They're mostly sitting in the back, but you'll introduce them. You'll get to meet them all in a moment, so I'll let them stay there. I'm hoping everyone already checked in at the registration desk and got a name tag. So this name tag has two purposes tonight. It both tells your name and also says your favorite software. So when we are having the networking time later on tonight, you can also find people who have the same free software that you have, and you can ask them about what their free software is as well. So this is a way for you to meet others in the community and also learn about what they like to use too. So you know already that we're here from Zalando. So I want to ask, who in this audience is from Zalando? Please raise your hand. Okay, cool. So remember those folks. If you have questions about Zalando later, or if you're just interested in learning more, talk to those people later. A few small housekeeping things. The restrooms are right here on the side. If you want to get more food or snacks or drinks while the presentation's going, just feel free, go ahead. And I think that's about it. Okay, let's keep going. So we have a code of conduct. This is new for our Zalando meetups, and it's posted also at the registration desk. So please become familiar with it. You can also find it on the meetup page. And if you have any questions about the code of conduct, you can ask myself or any of the organizers. So here is the agenda for tonight. We will start off with a panel discussion about free software from a group of very smart and technical experts. And we will hear about their perspective on free software. Then we'll take a short break. It's a great opportunity to get some more food, use the bathroom, grab some drinks. Then we'll have a series of really fantastic lightning talks. I think we have 5 lightning talks tonight. 6 lightning talks. So I think you're going to really enjoy these. Following that, we're going to have some more networking. And then feel free to stick around, meet others here as well. Okay. So you may have noticed at the registration desk that we have a hashtag for tonight. You can also tweet to our both either Zalando Tech or for the foundation that has this, this special day, which is the Free Software Foundation of Europe. Feel free to take a photo with your name tag or with the stickers at the registration desk and tweet some photos of the event. Okay, so now I'm really happy to introduce our moderator for the panel discussion. Okay, his name is Ferit Topcu. Nice to meet you. Welcome. Yes, so Ferit is a front-end developer at Zalando, and I will let him introduce himself with anything else he wants to share.
Hi, everyone. So there's not much to say, except that I love Webpack. If you're into front-end engineering, you might know it or not. And yeah, I just also working for Zalando now more than 2 years. Also active in other, yeah, just so. We are starting with the panel right now. So please also welcome the panelists. I will introduce them one by one soon. Yeah, that's all from me, and have fun. So you should all have a microphone, I hope. If not,
I think we can share, I guess.
yeah, okay. I thought there was one. I think we have enough. It's fine. So, okay, cool. Exactly. So, I will start directly with introducing the first panelist today. She recently joined Zalando, I think like a couple of months ago, and her job currently involves helping the whole company getting into the best practice of open source development, to share knowledge and to create a more a better environment to just about knowledge sharing and best practices about open source development, so that also engineering teams are enabled to do more in the open source world, but also generally just being a better developer. And she also is the co-founder of Phuc Asia, which is one of the largest open source foundations in Asia. And she is involved in various different open source projects, which she will describe later, I hope, over the last 10 years. And also she organized international tech events around open source, helped in various different open source community projects. So she's highly active the last 10 years, and I would say hi to Hong. So maybe you can also just say hi.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say one thing. The vegetarian option, the wrap is vegan. Somebody asked me this question. I just found out.
Yeah.
It's vegan.
Okay, awesome. If we have some, you might be now really happy. So our next guest is Travers, which some of you might know already because of various Postgres conferences. He's doing a lot in Postgres area for, I think, like almost 20 years now. Yeah. And for example, from my notes, one of the interesting things I read is he helped enabling creating a bridge between querying max-mind files from Postgres, which is really interesting. And today he's working as a head of database at a company called Adjust. And they are managing data of more than 400 terabytes. So quite a huge size.
And that's our smaller of our Postgres environments, actually. We have a bigger one now, too.
Okay, cool. So if you are into database and Postgres, I guess. Here you can ask him a couple of questions later. The next one is Lennart Poettering, which some of you may or may not know for being the author of Systemd. And he also does a lot of other different things in the free software world. So he contributed to more than 40 different projects since 2003. Yeah, that's what the data is saying, Lennart. And yeah, he also developed other famous projects like Pulse Audio or Avahi. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And last one, which if you're working in Zalando, is most likely you already know him. It's Henning Jacobs. Last month he had his 9th anniversary in Zalando. He's, I think, maybe even from day one, almost here, kind of. It feels like that. He helped Zalando a lot in moving, especially on the technological side, on different occasions. Right now, he basically helped the whole company transform to Kubernetes. He's highly involved over the last years in many projects related to Kubernetes. He's also the co-chair of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, Developer Experience Special Interest Group. And also an interesting side note is that if you're working with Henning in the company, he's really living for free software. So there is a lot of tech exchanges. For example, something like the initiative of if it's public money, then it should be also public code, which he pushed a lot in the company. He also shares a lot of other interesting initiatives in the company, especially about free software or also even our open source salary initiative. So it's really interesting always having him around. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I spam people basically with free software. That's what you're saying.
Yes. More or less. No, it's not spamming. Well, it's always interesting discussions, I have to admit. So now that we all kind of know each other, I would basically, like the panel is saying, I love free software. I would like to start with Hong and about how did you, what was maybe the first free software you used, or what was the first one you contributed to maybe, or how do you get into free software at all?
Okay. I have to start first.
Yeah, you have to start first.
So I told this story many times already. It was in 2007. That was the time I moved from Vietnam to Singapore for my study, and I have a Windows XP machine. At that time, with the copy version of Windows, what I got in Vietnam. When I moved to Singapore, for some reason, my computer got crashed. And then in Singapore, you know that if you cannot get the copy version of Windows, so you have to pay the full price for, I think, of over $100 or something. I did not want to pay this money. So my friend from the Linux user group of NUS, so there is a group, hacker group in NUS, so they install Ubuntu for me on my machine. So that was the first time I got to learn about free software. So I started to use Ubuntu, and I really like the software manager where you can just install everything directly and you don't have to go to any search engine to do that. And one thing that I always remember, so at that time, there was still open office. And whenever you want to make a CV, you have to export to PDF. Microsoft Office did not have that feature at that time. And I said, wow, this is so cool. Even better to Microsoft, and seeing that they never use Windows again. But that is not the only reason why I like the free software community. So after I started to use Ubuntu, there is a meetup every month that organized by the NUS Hacker Group. I went there and I learned a lot from the people. And the thing that got me really inspired, somebody could talk for 3 hours about the software that he or she contributed to over like 15, 20 years. And I cannot understand that how can people work voluntarily for something for so long and still be so excited. And it's more about the people, the community, and they really welcoming, even though I don't have a technical background, they really take the time, sit down with you and show you almost like every single code, like all about the spirit, the sharing mindset. So this is what I like about free software, and I start to involve in them. So I start by doing some localization for Mozilla, and I also do a little bit of on Firefox. And later on, I start to start with the Force Asia group, but I will talk about it later.
Okay, cool. I'll just move on. So what about Lennart, for example? Like, because you are kind of, from what I understand, the systemd author, the person with systemd connected. How did you end up maybe, like, what was the first experience contributing to any free software? And then,
like, actually contributing, like I remember that like I like the first time I ran Linux was in 1996, right? When I was going to school, like a friend from school suggested that there was this free operating system you could install. Now there was such a crazy idea to me that somebody would like write an operating system, give it out for free. So I found it quite interesting. It was back then it was Slackware, the Linux version that everybody was using. So I got a hold, like he had these copies of Slackware on some floppy disks. So I got a hold of them and I installed it on my computer. It was awful. It was like it so did not work for me. Like I didn't understand anything. It was just horrible. So I removed it again, went back to Windows because yeah, that actually worked for me. Windows 95 back in the time. Yeah, and then like I don't know, probably 3 years later or something, I tried it again. Like we actually, like another friend of mine, we actually paid for Red Hat Linux 5.0, and then installed that. And it was still pretty awful, I would say. And maybe it still is, I don't know. But I kind of, yeah, like stuck with it. I don't know. And then eventually, I mean, I realized that Red Hat 5.0 was really old already back at that time, and I wanted something newer. So I started compiling all my stuff myself, like GNOME in particular. And yeah, you learn a lot if you do that. And then I mean, it's just thinking back, that was also horrible. You know, it was a time of CVS and these kind of things, and so and I built my stuff all myself. So I downloaded all the tarballs and built them in order manually, and it was like in retrospective, absolutely crazy doing that. But I don't know, it taught me something, and then
it also feels good that I had never that experience. Sounds like that.
Yeah, it was a different time. I think nowadays everything's so much easier because you have all distributions that have packaged everything for you, and you have these distributions that even have packaged the very newest stuff, and you have GitHub, and you have all the package managers of the individual languages, so everything's so much easier. But back then, yeah, I don't know. And then I eventually started to think that, yeah, there was this ESD, not sure if anyone of you still knows that, the Enlightened Sound Daemon that GNOME had, and there was a standard that I was using, and I looked at the source and saw, oh, fuck this, I can do this better. And then I thought, okay, I'll write the new version in 1 weekend. And didn't end up being quite 1 weekend, but this is how I then actually started doing coding. And system came much later then. Oh, okay. But yeah, it was the hybris of believing that you can do something in a weekend that other people did before you in a couple of months. So I don't know. Yeah, the hybris is probably pretty helpful to get yourself sucked into projects.
It's still the same, I guess, today. I don't know any others, but I also sometimes end up thinking, I can do it maybe better over a weekend, and then.
Well, thankfully you learn. Like at least I learned a little bit. I'm not my hybris is not as big anymore nowadays.
Yeah.
Like if when I start a project, I know that I can finish it, and usually not in a weekend, right? Like so.
Back then, we all had the same, I guess. Okay. And what about you, Chris, for example?
So back when I was in college, I got a job where I was at the computer center, where I was helping people use shell accounts on an Ultrix system, and kind of got familiar with the C shell and some command line utilities at that point. A couple years later, I got introduced to Red Hat 6 and kind of started using that as my primary operating system. Having worked with Ultrix, it just felt like a better environment compared to what I was used to. And so in terms of use, that's kind of where it started. Some years later, after I had gone out on my own, self-employed, I had installed a program called SQL Ledger for a customer of mine. They needed it for a point-of-sale system. And a couple months later, I found a security problem in it. Basically, I found that you could forge credentials of other users who have ever logged into the system. I reported this to the author, and he claimed to have fixed it. Found out that he hadn't really fixed it. We had a few arguments. I didn't have the hubris problem, so I didn't want to fork at that point. But one thing led to another, and in order to support my customers, a few of us got together and forked the software. And basically at that point, we got a few heavy-hitting Postgres people in, and basically I've been using, diving deeper and deeper into Postgres since then. The software we forked, we called it Ledger SMB. It's still going on. I haven't had time to contribute to it so much, but you know, it's kind of where I got my my heavy database start.
That's pretty cool. So, and still you're going to contribute to it somehow, I guess. Yeah, cool. Maybe what about Henning? Because I know you also do a lot.
Yeah, I didn't start with Linux, so I had also like Windows at that time, and then actually my first open source project was a DirectX program with Delphi 4. So so I think this is important. So it's a lot for me about sharing and giving back, and this actually had a huge kind of success at that time. So I published this on GeoCities. I don't know if anybody remembers GeoCities. I don't know if GitHub or something it didn't exist at that time. So this was, of course, already later than '96. I think this was, I don't know when it was, but so this was my first open source, you could say, contribution. And actually this was the success because Delphi 4 was kind of this enterprise-y thing. I think I had also this enterprise license, which I didn't even really have, but I did an apprenticeship at someone else who had it. But anyway, so this was kind of for doing games with Delphi 4. And so like people who used Delphi and wanted to do games with DirectX and could use that. And then later on, like I switched to SUSE 6.2 and Debian Woody and stuff like that. So, but I think the first like initial trigger was sharing how I solved something, and this helped others to solve a similar problem. And I think this is still the core of free software or like open source for me.
Thanks a lot. So I sure have a couple of questions I want to ask everyone. But if I just provided the resume, kind of, the short resume from all of you. For me, it's always interesting to just know, like you said, you started one with the hybris or the other one just because of the job or just because of, it was just interesting sharing stuff and getting feedback, I guess. That's also always something which I like with open source or free software, that I can just contribute and someone will say, hey, thanks a lot, because it was there for months and no one really cared. Maybe some of you, maybe Chris could start. How did really this free software movement or free software or your contributions really changed maybe parts of your daily life or like your career path? Maybe you thought something else at the beginning and then you end up in free software.
Yeah, if you had told me when I set out to start my own business in 2004 that I'd be doing accounting software, I probably would have run and done something else. But, you know, the thing is, challenges are where you find them. And so two things kind of came together for me. The first one was the experience of self-employment and trying to sort of be one's own economic player. And on the other hand, the fact that open source effectively allows software developers to control the tools that they work with and the development environments that they work with, and consequently the tools that they create. Sort of snowballed in my life. And you know, I was self-employed for 15 years doing a variety of open source things in that area, just simply because that connection between trying to be my own economic player and being able to be my own sort of, or being able to control my technical tools were such of a really good combination.
Thanks. What about you, Hong? Because I know, like I said, you what's going on? So because we all know now that you kind of co-founded the Force Asia organization, what was like maybe changing moments when you founded it or even before, which led to exactly this, that you found one of the biggest organizations around open source software in Asia? And how does it feel maybe even today still? Tough question, I think.
Yes. So, so what I got to say is that by participating in the community, it actually changed my life. The first thing is that I came from a very small town in Vietnam, and for me, travel abroad is such a big deal. So all the things to do with policy and the visa and everything, but like since I started to engage with open source, a lot of doors that open up. So I got now I can basically travel to wherever I want to, and I got to connect to so many people. And the thing that I learned personally is that if I face any challenging or problem, I always have the mindset that there must be a solution somewhere. So I always have the thinking that, okay, so there must be an answer, and I try my best to find out the answers for that question. So the impact of open source or free software for me is the ability to be independent and to empower myself to do more things. So a few years back, I still thinking, like growing up in the developing country, you always like want to graduate from university and get a job, earn for a living, take care of your family. But now I feel that I have a goal in life. I want to foster more collaboration and get more people to use open source and free software around the world, because it actually gives people opportunities. For instance, the education system in Vietnam and also in Europe is not the same. So when you go to school, you don't learn so much. After you finish university, you are not sure that you'll be able to get a job and can have a stable life. But with open source, open sharing, everyone can learn. So the opportunity come to you. And what I see not only for myself, but every year, so we run a lot of events and education program at Force Asia. People tell me that because of Force Asia, I got to travel outside of my country for the first time, and some people from very far away from India, they got into program like online program Google Summer of Code, and they got connect to so many people. So when you do free software open source, how do you say, physically distant is not there anymore. You connect to people all over the world, and there's so many learning opportunities out there. So this is the impact, not only for me, but for people that I see almost every day. Yeah.
I see it also a lot. For example, in the front-end area, in this JavaScript area, there are a lot of people from Asia contributing to certain projects, libraries, and then somehow when you are connected with them more than a month, then you somehow suddenly see like, oh, interesting, they went from India to Germany, and then somehow they end up in some US big company, which they also never thought about, that contributing to software can lead to certain career opportunities or like self-employment. But also I think the community, what you said also.
Yeah, the community is cool. And one thing, and now I almost have friends everywhere. Whenever I go to a new city, I just connect to the Linux user group. And when I connect to people, I feel safe. I know people, like how they react in the community. So it's like a friendship connection. So when you involve in one project, maybe Chris and Lennart and even Henning here can help. So you have friends that stay forever for 15, 20 years. No matter where you go, you will still be connected with them. And I find something that really cool being in the open source community of free software. Whenever I go out to do something together with a group of developers, if there is any problem in the audience, for instance, okay, so you don't know how to make the camera work, or you don't know how to turn on the screen, they always have the solution. So I'm sure if you can come up to ask us a question, one of the person here would have the answer. So this is something really cool that I find.
It's interesting that you mentioned the community aspect, because for me it would be also interesting to ask Lennart how, for example, for him it was regarding building a community around systemd, or just being part of the Linux community, or just how it was, your experience, like you said, starting with different things and then you end up also building systemd, when you said you never started with that from the beginning.
So that's a good question. Like, I don't know how communities work still after all those years. And I mean, I've been part of a lot of different communities, right? Like when I did Pulse Audio and Navahi, I mostly aligned with the GNOME people, and I still know them as in. Thank you. And I still know them as a very, very friendly community, right? Like I still go to their conferences. Like, for example, I was at this year's Guade conference, even though my actual area of work's not so much desktop focused anymore, right? But because they're nice people, I like to go there, and then I just hang out there just for like meeting the people I've been like knowing for 15 years or something now, right? But also, you know, you might have known like all the controversy around systemd, right, and the adoption, and this all went quite far, all the way to like I got death threats and all these kind of things. So I know this. The Linux community is very diverse, and the diversity is not just in a positive way. There are also lots of, let's say, assholes in it, right? And so, I don't know, I got to see both sides of the story. I know, like, the lessons that I learned for myself is that, yeah, I don't want to be part of these communities where this is accepted, right? It's one of the reasons why, for example, that I stopped doing kernel work and things like that, right? So, I don't know, for my own communities, for the systemd community, which I think systemd is quite well established these days, right? Like all the big distributions have adopted it. We clearly said that, yeah, bad behavior in the community is certainly not allowed. We will immediately block people if they misbehave and these kind of things, because I know, yeah, I don't have to deal with this, right? Like, I mean, free software is great, but being an asshole is just not a, like, yeah, that's a waste of time. You can be as good as you want with your technical stuff. If you're not nice to me, I don't want to listen to you, right? So, I don't know, like, yeah, community is a great thing if it works, and I think in the GNOME case it's really nice, so I always go back there, and have very positive feelings about that. But there are other communities where that's a lot more complex, and where there's lots of more, like, yeah, negative attitudes that are accepted that really shouldn't be accepted, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a direction I don't want to go for. I totally agree what you said. I would say that, yeah, certain things should not be accepted, especially like we also have our code of conduct. Yeah, I would say thanks on that side. Interesting. I didn't know that. I'm not into Linux that far, but it's, I don't know. It's interesting what you all experienced. Maybe Henning has also some interesting insights from his, not regarding death threats, like maybe also with his work currently in the CNCF interest group, how it is, because it's also a lot about, I guess, community building, talking to people, meeting new people.
Yeah, I will actually start with something else. What really made me push for free software, because I'm kind of like a convert. I don't know how you call it. So I also did 4 years of .NET and C# and like proprietary environments. And after that, I really said, no way I will ever work again in a proprietary environment. So this was one of the side of things that I really felt this kind of restriction in user and environment. This is really hurtful for me personally. Because, I mean, if you cannot upgrade the SQL server because you need a different license, I mean, this is just stupid, right? This is like, I mean, this doesn't really make sense. And also, like, the whole, like, environment where you really want to see how things are going, but you don't have the source code. So you have to look into the mono code, which is kind of the open source version of .NET, because they try to reverse engineer it for you. So you have to, like, use open source to actually understand the proprietary code. So this was for me personally, like, that I say I will never work again with kind of like with really closely with proprietary environments. But also kind of why I really like this public code, public money, public code like initiative on Free Software Foundation Europe, is that like it doesn't make sense that we as taxpayers pay for something which is completely closed and locked away, and that the vendor is barely dictating how things work for us. I mean, we own kind of the tax-paid software, right, as taxpayers. And for example, my mother, which she was a director for a small school, and she had to do like every month statistics for their school. And this was a software written by the Niedersachsen, which is a state, a federal state in Germany. So it was not even a vendor. And this was proprietary and didn't work on the latest version of Windows. So, and I couldn't make it work, right? So it's like, and so we had to keep an old laptop around with this old Windows version, just that she could do her job. To report the statistics for the school, which is so absurd and perverse. And yeah, I think like there are just no reason why we like shouldn't have all tax-paid software as free software. So yeah, these two aspects I think are like what really drives me to.
And when did that happen?
What do you mean?
With this, your mother and the direct position, and then the software thing?
Oh, I don't know. This was, I think, Windows. So the software, I think, needed still Windows 9. It didn't work with Windows 7. What was before Windows 7? I don't even know.
Vista?
Vista was before 7.
I think it had like Windows 98 or something. It required anyway. Yeah. So it really didn't work, even not with compatibility mode. It doesn't matter.
So that's also like your personal experience, why you also then get into all these initiatives, because you felt the pain, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I could have fixed it, right? If it's free software, I wouldn't have a real problem. And this is often like this, right? So we have so many potential like people who can fix stuff, and like everybody who like has an apartment or house, right, knows how to change a light bulb and maybe repair something and so on. And I think we should have the right to repair stuff. And like for text-paid software, it's even more important, like to be able to look inside and fix stuff.
Thanks.
But you asked about CNCF.
Yeah, I just currently, I just thought about.
You can go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just go ahead, maybe.
No, I mean you can go ahead.
I would go ahead, and then I will come back to CNCF because I mean, we have Zalando people who we are all using Kubernetes, but maybe there are also others interested also in that work. I would like to maybe ask a question regarding Chris, because I mean, some might or might know that the whole company at Zalando is basically running on Postgres. At least as far as I know, I don't think we see any other database currently in the company. Rarely something else. What was, how to say it at best? So you're involved like for almost 20 years in that community. What was like maybe one of the most fascinating or biggest changes between when you joined and today? Maybe some interesting discussions, like maybe also some other things like death threats. I don't know.
Okay, so this really kind of shows how far Postgres has come in 20 years. I don't know how many people here worked with Postgres before, you know, like 7.3. But I remember when I first started working with Postgres, it was in '99, and you didn't have an ability to drop columns from tables. And so I would do all my prototyping on MySQL, I would dump the schema, I would convert it, I would load it in Postgres, and that's how basically I would work. And when 7.3 came out, I think it was 7.3, it added the ability to drop a column from a table. And basically that meant I no longer had to use MySQL for prototyping, and that was probably the single most exciting thing for me, at least in that time frame. In the meantime, we've gotten replication, we've gotten a lot of other features. There was a bug that I reported in, I think 7.4, where if you created a table with a type that was a composite type in a column, the table would become write-only. You could write to it, but when you read it, the backend would crash. They fixed that in the somewhere in the 8 series. I don't know when exactly. But basically what we've seen over that time period is that Postgres has gone from being a very extensible database management system to a system that you can extend without a lot of specialized knowledge, which you can use and which doesn't require a huge amount of overhead just to make it work. And I guess that's what I would say about it.
Thanks. So I would, before I go to Henning, maybe about the CNCF, I would maybe also ask Hong again a bit, the Phuc Asia, and like you said, your background, but is it also like Phuc Asia is maybe also enabling others? Like you said, is there like initiatives, or how is it like organizing the events in Asia and all these different countries for like thousands of people? Like, do you also see like Phuc Asia as something like an enabler for people, like you said, to go out, see the world, maybe contribute?
Yes, so Phuc Asia organization, we actually release a lot of software, free software. So there is more than 200 different repositories on the Phuc Asia GitHub, and most of the software that we develop based on our own need. For instance, we organize events so many years, and we see the need of having a free software solution for event organizers, similar to Eventbrite. So we have our own solution called EventYay, and then we recently also work on a conversational web, which is a software called Suzy.ai, alternative to Amazon Echo or Google Home. And the past, I think 3 months ago, we released our own hardware, so to make production possible with the community. So for us, we develop product and we run a lot of events. So the way how you keep community together. So people work together online, but you also need to create an environment where people come together, like today, how we are here discuss how we can improve on something and work on something together. And we also run education program, online education program, and so we as in the Force Asia community that enable young people to contribute to free software and guide them what are the steps that need to take in order to become a free software developer or contributors. So we cover from product, providing mentorship and training, and create environment where people get together. So that's basically the work of Force Asia.
That's pretty cool. Thanks on that. That's not a good move because it's about education. And then I would also now ask Henning again, maybe about Kubernetes, because you have, it's a group, what was it, the group? Developer Experience Interest Group. Like what's going on maybe in your interest group, also maybe about enabling developers, maybe also for Kubernetes, I don't know.
So first of all, I mean, there's nothing big going on right now. So it's just like the CNCF, which is part of Linux Foundation, has this end-user supporters, which are actually organizations like Zalando and companies who are using free software, part of the CNCF stack. And they have a small interest group, which we just had met twice so far. And what this is about is really about the developer experience of these CNCF projects. And for example, Kubernetes or also all the other tools which are running on Kubernetes or also alongside it. And we barely exchange ideas how to improve developer experience and how we deal with it in organizations. And what is interesting about this, that I think this is like part of this whole community education, free software stuff, that it's not so much about actually doing so much code and so on. I mean, like everybody can write code, and like if you look at GitHub or the software archive there in France, which archives all the free software. So this is like easy to write lines of code, but actually exchanging all the ideas and learning from each other, I think there are not enough like spaces to do this. And this group is badly end users, so there are no vendors, so there is no like Google saying like this is how we would like do it and this is the right thing, or other vendors or cloud providers. This is really like companies trying to solve this problem for them, and and talking about these different softwares, free software projects and how to deal with them.
That's always good if vendors are not part of any interest group.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying, right? Never ask a hairdresser if you need a haircut. He will always say that you need a haircut. And that's like if you ask a vendor if you need his product, if you ask Red Hat if you need Red Hat Linux, probably they will say yes.
Maybe. Okay. Thanks. So just need to keep a bit my eye on the time. So before I move on to the audience, so you can also ask a couple of questions, I would maybe also ask each of you just briefly about what would you recommend, because we talked a lot about community and education, what would you recommend people to get more involved into free software? Like what would be your maybe one advice, when maybe even a project where you say, okay, we need people here, maybe just come and join us. I would start with Lennart, for example.
Yeah, like we always need new people. It's, I mean, unfortunately, free software developers don't grow in trees. It would be great if they did. So, yeah, it would be great, of course, if any one of you wants to join our project. I mean, it's of course always difficult because, like, I mean, initially when you start, like being interested into something, like actually finding the understanding enough from the project that you can prepare a patch, for example, or understanding enough that you can write documentation for it, or doing these kind of things. That's depending on the project. That's quite a level of expertise you have to have reached that you can do this. So this is of course the complicated part. But after you did, I don't know, just do it, I guess. Like, I mean, we, like, at least from the system side, the project, we try really, really hard to make it as easy as possible to contribute to our project. Like, this has some interesting effects, by the way. Like, for example, system is hosted on GitHub. Now, GitHub, like, I mean, we had a free software event. Like, GitHub doesn't really qualify as, like, the best place for free software, given that it's not free software itself. We host our stuff there anyway. for the main reason being really like we're very much interested in this networking effect and keeping the level as low as possible for contribution. And the simple fact in life is that right now pretty much everybody who is a hacker probably already has a GitHub account. Hence, if we make it as easy as possible for them to submit to us by just having our project in GitHub, and so all they have to do is a PR, we make it easy. So I don't know, like we really try to make it easy, and my recommendation would always be just do it and contribute a PR. And we, at least from our side of the project, try really, really hard to be nice even when reviewing things. There are projects with, well, they aren't as nice, but yeah, like
yeah, I guess it's also about like you don't always have to code to contribute. It's like also about documentation. Maybe like this is maybe something we might also like as I don't know generally in the community maybe to embrace more, tell people more like you don't need to contribute to the code to help us. Yeah, maybe I don't know. I mean, Chris, like, sorry.
Yeah, actually, on the Ledger SMB community, which is this accounting software, one of the things that we decided very early on was that there's not really a difference between users and contributors. The people who are using the software, who are engaged in the community, asking questions on the email list is actually a bit of a form of contribution. From there, it can get to documentation, it can get to, graphics design, it can be almost anything. We like to think that code is sort of king in free software because without code, we don't have software. But there are a lot of other things that go into projects also that aren't code. So if you're interested in helping out as like analyzing the user experience or who uses the software, what do they need out of it, coming up with user studies, or a lot of this sort of legwork, it's stuff that could be done, and basically I would say just go out, see something that needs to be done, and do it, whether it's coding or not.
Cool.
Yes, so if you run a free software project and you want to get more people to contribute to your project, so I agree with Lennart and Chris, the first thing that you need to do is to keep the entry barriers really low, to make sure that make a good documentation, show people how they can contribute. As he mentioned, GitHub is not a free software project, but why people do use it, because everyone now almost have a GitHub account. And I also see one example that I want to share. For instance, if you try to promote your project and try to get people to engage, when you see a person that use a Windows machine or something, or use Google, please don't judge them. So they could be the future contributors. I see in a lot of community that they really close the door. They don't want to work with a corporation or people who use non-free software product, but it's not the way how you go. If you want to get people into your community, you need to be more welcome to them. And again, as Lennart said, not all the communities is good, so there are also negative behavior. If you need to stop this kind of behavior right in the beginning, but it also, whenever something happens that you feel not right, you should take a step back to think, what is the motivation of people? Because there are a lot of misunderstanding around the world. I also want to give another example. For instance, a lot of people think that Asian people are very rude, because when we start a conversation, we will always ask, how old are you? What is your age? But the reason why people ask this question, because in Vietnam, it depends on the person, how much older or younger that person to me, I will have a different way to address that person. There was a prefix before the name of the person. So, and it also happened in many different aspects of life. So before you think that that person being rude to you, maybe take a step back and think what is the background of the person to avoid misunderstanding. And be nice to the people, be nice to everyone, and be sincere. So that's what I would suggest.
Thanks. Maybe Henning.
Yeah, I would just start with sharing stuff, because I totally agree. It's not so much about code, and that's, for example, Kubernetes is a nice example where, I mean, like, yes, we have enough code lines to like fill like I don't know how many trucks of hard disk out, but it's more about sharing experiences, and you can start simple, right? Like write a blog post how you used Blender to do a nice render or whatever project, and this is already helpful for people, or Ubuntu users or something, like all these communities. I think this is even more helpful than actually software, because there is already so much software out there. And of course, we need also more contributors and maintainers. Some projects are only maintained by a few people, but I think like the gross of people can already share their experiences and how to do stuff, tutorials, and so on.
Thanks. Thanks all of you right now for sharing all these like nice words at the end. So I would just thanks, Sarah.
Yep.
Is it working or?
Hello? Yes?
Yeah. So if you have any questions in general or to any person directly, just.
Hi. Are you listening to me? It's okay? I don't know. Is it one? Okay. So I would like to ask a question to Lennart. And I think, yeah, now I hear it. I saw that you released the 241 version of systemd today, so thank you, nice stuff. And it's exactly about systemd that I would like to ask, because from what I saw, I think in the last 15 years is probably the most controversial piece of free software that I ever saw. So I would like to ask you personally, how do you deal with that? Like, do you care, or you are just writing the best software you can, and this is not important?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like we as the systemd people always wondered why we actually managed to push this through, even though other people tried something similar before and didn't manage to pull it through, right? Like, I mean, systemd is certainly not the first init system in the world. It's, I mean, it's not even the first attempt to replace System 5 init system in the world. But for some reason, we prevailed in the end, and we like always wondered how did that happen. And like I think, well, I can't really, I don't really know the answer. We thought we had the answer for a while, but then again, there were some projects we worked on that we failed with massively. So we came to the conclusion we actually don't know how to push through a project in the free software world. But for some reason, it appears to me that Kaisivas and I, the people behind systemd originally, we are, I don't know, like, with all the attacks we got all the time for the stuff we did, we learned to distinguish whether this criticism that we got was from people that we respect or not, and we were very good at ignoring the hate and nonsense we got from people that we didn't have, like, respect towards ourselves. So for us, it was relatively easy to brush that off. Of course, if you get criticism from people that you actually have respect for, it becomes much harder. I know that this is, like, for other people, this is much harder. I know that some people who tried to push an init system through, they were not, like, willing to deal with all the crap you can get if you try to do something. I mean, it makes me feel so, like, now I'm talking so much bad stuff about how hard free software is. Let me stress that we probably are the more complex side of the free software community. I think many communities have it easier. I think, you know, with the stuff that we did is like we pushed something through in a, you know, Unix is more than just a free, like a software project. Unix is a little bit of a religion to some people, and Unix is something that was invented in the 70s, and in particular as a religion in the original version or in the original concepts that were introduced back then. Where what we did with systemd was revolutionize that to some point, right? Like do something new, and it is very hard to convince people who, like, are very entrenched to the classic ways how these things do with something new, right? Like, because unlike all the other people, we didn't design a new operating system, but we tried to take Linux the way it was and try to update it and bring a little bit more to the future. And that is, of course, like, nobody likes change in the part of the ecosystem that make his life harder, that he's not actually interested in. Everybody loves change in his own area, of course, because you want to see progress in whatever you work on. But in everything else, it better please stay the way it is, right? Like, because you don't want to spend the time on updating this. Of course, I think this, like, sticking to that too much, this is going to create an environment where you can never progress, right? Like ultimately everything has to progress to some point. It's technology, right? But I don't know, yeah. I hope this was somewhat like an answer for your question. It's like, I don't know, like I am very good at ignoring criticism from people who, like, I mean, people on the internet sometimes can be massive assholes. And if it's obvious that these people are people I can safely ignore, then I safely ignore them. But I don't know. So I'm built this way that I can ignore this. I know that other people are not built like this. I have it easy in many ways because I don't know. I'm not a minority in any way. I'm super white and super male and super everything. I'm not a. It's very, very easy for me, right? I had a good education, all these kind of things. I very much feel for everybody where it's not like that, right? Like if you get all that shit that we got while we pushed it through, and you happen to have a harder time and not in the like you cannot just focus on the technical stuff, but have to focus on everything else, then I think it's very, very hard. It can be very, very hard. But yeah, for some reason we weren't built like this, and like we were lucky enough to have it easy. So we took the chance and pushed it through. I hope this was too much of an answer. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I realize Systemd has its own interesting history.
Let's underline though that it's mostly history now, right? Like I think at this point in time, like I haven't got death threats in a long, long time now, and so this is hopefully, at least from my perspective, it's kind of over. Like there are some holdouts who still want to make noise about the project, but I think it's mostly over.
Well, people don't have to use Systemd if they don't want to, so I don't understand why somebody would be upset about it.
Well, I mean, at this point, it is kind of hard to avoid it, right? Like
we use OpenRC.
I pity you.
So I was actually one of, I'm not kind of an internet troll, but I also actually follow, I must confess, Systemd sucks on Twitter. I think they didn't tweet anything recently, so
I follow that Twitter account too.
You also follow it, right? And I think one of the core criticisms which I also would actually apply both to Kubernetes and Systemd to these projects is, I think, and this is actually what some people would freak out about, maybe not everyone, but it's kind of this level of complexity we are always introducing now. I mean, we need some progress, this is clear. Also when you look actually at Git, right, nobody really complains now about Git because everybody uses it. But if you look at from a product or user experience side, actually Git is really horrible, right? I mean, I'm using it every day and so on. And this is like, I think, true for many of these software components which introduce a lot of complexity. And if you would like have to sell this and have a product person and UX and so on, you would actually approach some things, I think, a little bit different. I'm not talking now specifically about Systemd, but I think this is something which we shouldn't ignore, and I think this is also important in the free software community, right? It's often coders doing stuff for other coders or engineers doing something for engineers, but we shouldn't forget like user experience and what are also like the naive users who are just like doing something and then have to start something which have no background why this is necessary and so on. So this would be my like slight criticism to this like complexity of projects.
One more question?
Yeah, maybe another question, I would say.
Any other questions?
Hey, thanks. My question is that we know that almost every project, almost every open source project starts just for fun, and they will start working on the project, and at some point the project gets serious, and we know that corporates start using that without paying money or without supporting the contributors. How do you imagine in the future of the open source projects in that situation? Because at some point people don't want to continue, get bored, and we know that a lot of disasters happen for that. But what is the ideal situation that you can imagine?
I start with a very naive and idealistic way of seeing things. I think it's similar to, for example, art and similar stuff. So I think like if nobody would get money for art, we would still have art, right? And this is actually, I think, also true for free software. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay people for like contributions and maintenance. I think we need to solve this problem. But maybe there are also like, I mean, a society approaches like basic income or something, which could also go into this direction. Like I said, it's very idealistic way of seeing things, and will not get there soon. But that being said, I think you can also get money for software, right? There are open source company. I mean, we're talking here with Red Hat, for example. So I think Lennart is not starving every day working on his project. So I mean, yes, it's a hard problem, and I saw recently there is this new like projects to actually pay, make it easier for enterprises to pay like maintainers, because this is actually one challenge for enterprises. Is actually it's very easy to pay AWS, right? You do this contract once, every developer has kind of a credit card, right? And you don't need to deal with it anymore. But it would be really hard for like for a bigger corporation to pay individuals for dealing with open source, right? Because the individual might not have like registered anything, right? And how do you deal with this? And bigger corporations actually don't have good processes for this. And this is, for example, something which we might kind of address somehow.
So I was self-employed for 15 years, basically mostly contributing to open source projects. I guess I don't see it as such of a hard problem, actually, because if you're using a piece of software and you need help on it, you can almost always pay somebody to do that. It may or may not be the maintainer. And if you can't, obviously, if you can find the maintainer, that's great, then you can pay them for this. And the way I always looked at it is that Microsoft, for example, invests money in new features and then they sell licenses to try to make that money back. But if you're an open source developer, you can actually go out and you can charge people who want a feature for your labor to put into making that feature. And that was basically my business model for a lot of the time. At Adjust now, we contribute to a lot of open source projects just simply because we have to. At our scale, being able to fix the projects is important to us. And so we contribute that. But even when I was self-employed, I would have actually preferred to have code contributions to money contributions, because spreading out some of the work kind of makes a lot of things easier. So I guess I would say I don't see the problem so much as being something that has to be solved by users, as something that people need to be thinking about when they're asking how do I want to get something back for my effort.
Do you want maybe, or just?
Yeah, so actually now there's several organizations that release like best practices and research on how you can commercialize overall free software project, and the same with Phuc Asia. So we also working on a model like in Phuc Asia, also acting like incubation for free software project that help the project or the maintainer itself how to register as a company and how to advise them how to start with services. A lot of people, like Chris said, that you can pay, and also Henning mentioned that if the problem is that a lot of for free software project, they don't have an entity where companies can pay them. But if you offer a solution, there must be like advice for the project how to go through the commercialized phase, how you can offer open source or free software as a service to companies. I think that if that established, a lot of corporations will start to use free software. And in terms of individuals, so I also got questions. So if I contribute to free software, how I'm gonna earn an income and make a living? But I believe that if you have the knowledge, that is the best value that you can get by contributing to free software. As long as you have knowledge and the skill, people will come to you. You don't even need to go out and look for jobs. So there will always be something with people who has knowledge and skill. That's what I say.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean.
One last question, or?
I mean, I don't know. If people are still fine, we don't need to break. Maybe just one last question.
One last.
Yeah, let's keep it like the one last one.
I have a three-part question. No, okay. What is it always like what Hong mentioned in the beginning, that you've worked on something for a decade or more and you still are excited about it and you just work on it forever? Or is it something that maybe the question is, like, if you've worked on something for that long, how does it feel to let go of it and to move on? And or does it always kind of consume you a little bit in the background, even though you're off doing something else?
I handed off Pulse Audio development and Avahi development to other people, and for me it was I already had my new project that I was working on, systemd, so it was actually kind of easy. So of course I still follow what Pulse Audio is doing, like in the community in Avahi, but I think I know that some people have trouble giving these things up, and then like having like these backseat maintainers that stay around but don't stay around. It can be quite annoying for projects. But for myself, I decided very clearly I want to give this up so that other people can do whatever they think is right, and I shouldn't be in control of that stuff. So yeah, I'm distanced and happy, but I still follow.
So with Ledger SMB, I'm not as involved as I used to be. I basically was the primary developer for probably 15 years. I basically kind of withdrew just simply because other things were happening in life and so forth. And the thing was, other people picked up on that, and they just took the project forward. And the current guy who's kind of organizing it is doing an excellent job. And to some extent, there's a sense of pride that you built a community that can outlast you. And I just can't stress that enough, because there's always this fear of, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, what's going to happen to the users of the software? And when you take a step back and other people pick up the work, it's like, this can survive without me. I've succeeded.
So let's get the bus hit us. Kind of. Okay. Cool. So then, thanks a lot for our panelists, and thank you also for just listening and asking all these nice questions. And I would say we will have now a break, and just thanks.
So we'll have a quick 10-minute break. So we'll see you back at 7:30, and enjoy some more food and some more drinks, and we'll have our lightning talks after the break. Thanks.